وأنا أقدم موجزا من أطروحتي بالعربية ثم أحول إلى الإنجليزية. أنا لا أرى أن هناك شيء جديد أذكره عن قصة التاريخ الإسلامي أو تاريخ المخطوطات الإسلامية في الديار النيجيرية لدى حضور متكون من كبار العلماء والفضلاء والعالمات الفضلاء، اللهم إلا من باب التذكير لأن الذكرى تنفع المؤمنين. وعليه لا أكرر ما كنتم تعرفون من متى بدأ الإسلام في هذه المنطقة وكذا وكذا، لكن أركز أولاً على أهمية أن ننظر إلى التراث الإسلامي الثقافي النيجيري من الرؤية جديدة. وهذه الرؤية أرى أنها لابد أن تكون ننظر إلى هذا التراث لا كتراث مستقل في منطقة معينة، لكن كجزء لا يتجزأ من الفكر الإسلامي الدولي. هذه نقطة مهمة. التراث الإسلامي الإفريقي ليس تراث مستقل لحد ذاته، لكنه جزء لا يتجزأ منذ نشوئه وحتى يومنا هذا من التراث الإسلامي العالمي برمته. هذه هي النقطة الأولى. والذي نعرف عن التراث الإسلامي في غرب أفريقيا أكثره كتب في شمال أفريقيا وفي مصر والشرق الأوسط، وكثيرا من علماء غرب أفريقيا ذهبوا إلى هذه المناطق ودرسوا هناك، وكثيرا ما كتبه ليس جديد ابتكروه من رؤوسهم، لكن هذه ممارستهم بالتيارات التي تطورت من التراث الإسلامي المتين العالمي. هذه النقطة المهمة التي أريد أن أركز عليها. والنقطة الثانية هي طبعا المخطوطات كأشياء مادية ننظر إليها ونتعجب أما تستره من الأخبار والتاريخ، وفيها شيء من الفن الجميل الذي ننظر إليه كما نرى في المعرض. إذا كان كل ما نقول عن المخطوطات هي أنها مخطوطة مهمة نحافظ عليها ونصانها بشكل يكون كتقديس لهذه الأشياء، أنا لا أرى هذا هو الرؤية الصحيحة للمخطوطات. أرى أنه يجب علينا أن نركز عليها كسجل للأفكار العلمية والثقافية التي يجب علينا أن نتعامل معها، أن نفهمها، أن نفسرها، أن نترجمها ونعلق عليها. هذه هي النقط التي أريد التركيز عليها. والنقطة الأخيرة هي دراسة خاصة عن مجموعة من المخطوطات الإسلامية النيجيرية وبعضها من غرب أفريقيا التي توجد الآن في جامعة نورثويسترن في الولايات المتحدة. ومن هنا أتحول إلى اللغة الإنجليزية مع جزيل الشكر. Me and my colleagues agreed that the topics we are going to talk look like they are repeating each other when you look at the abstract. So we quickly discuss and agree to divide the major topics to cover. I will cover some aspect of the international dimensions of the Islamic manuscript tradition of Nigeria. And my colleague, Professor Mokhtar, will look at the broad historical development. And my other colleague, Dr. Awal, will look at the role of political and social institutions, especially that of Sokoto Caliphate, in the development of Islamic manuscripts. Quickly, the international dimensions that I emphasize, we can see it, of course, in the sense that the first learned scholar of Islam from West Africa we know him only in North Africa, Sheikh Ibrahim Yaqub al-Kanemi. لا نعرف عن سيرته محليا، لكن نعرف عنه we know about him from what is written on him by historians of North Africa. al-Bakri, al-Idrisi, Masalan, mention the presence of Borno students in Cairo studying in the 13th century and so on. So this to me emphasizes the international engagement with the classical Islamic tradition by scholars from West Africa. I don't see Islamic tradition of West Africa as something different or something special in West Africa, but as part that is an integral and inseparable part of the global historical tradition of Islamic learning. Of course, it has local peculiarities, like some of the languages and some of the topics, but that is not unique to the Islamic heritage in West Africa. In Iran and in India and in Central Asia, there are local peculiarities that are associated with the Islamic communities there. But the most important point is that the Islamic tradition in West Africa is not a separate, independent intellectual tradition, but an inseparable part of the global tradition of Islamic learning. And this is documented in so many ways by the biographers, by the professors who taught there, and by the visits that come here. Another important international dimension of the Islamic tradition of West Africa that is not sufficiently appreciated is what I would call the modern Western engagement with the Islamic tradition of West Africa. And this can be dated to Leono Africanus in the 1500s, who began to translate some of the materials about Islam in West Africa into European languages. And then subsequently, all the European travelers who came across West Africa interacted with the ulama. If you read majority of their travel accounts, you will visibly see the influence of what the ulama said to them. Many of them quoted directly from the ulama. Some of them included Arabic text as appendices in their travelogues. And I will mention specific example of Clapperton, who visited Sokoto in the 1820s, and he died there in a second visit, and the materials he collected were eventually published by his younger companion, Landers. In the account of Clapperton, you can see his interaction with Sultan Muhammad Bello. And Sultan Muhammad Bello engaged Clapperton about Christian theology and about Trinity. And Clapperton said, you know what, I don't know a lot of theology. You may know more about Christian theology than I know. And if you read further, you will see what? The influence of Sultan Bello on the accounts of Clapperton. This is a dimension of the internationalization of the intellectual tradition of Islam in West Africa. Even more than Clapperton, Heinrich Barth, who traveled in the region in the 1850s, traveled all over northern Nigeria, what is today northern Nigeria, and up to Timbuktu and back. He based his account on Borno on the work of Ibn Fartua. And he said so. What is more, Barth included Arabic text in his travelogue as appendices, what he obtained from the various ulama. Through this channel, African Islamic intellectual tradition became internationalized into Western world. Of course, they had their political and military purpose for seeking this knowledge, and they vary over time. Much of the early collections have been preserved in Western universities and research centers and museums up to the present. And one of the manuscripts that I want to focus is a descendant of this long tradition of the Western engagement with the African traditions of Islamic learning. Of course, during the colonial time, especially in what became northern Nigeria, there was massive engagement, especially with the intellectual production of the Sokoto Caliphate. And it influenced British colonial policy in many significant ways that many people do not sufficiently appreciate. So this, apart from the international dimensions in the Islamic world, there is this other internationalization of Islamic tradition in the Western world. And this has continued, I say, to the present, as exemplified by the collection at Northwestern University in the United States. This collection is comprised of 6 different collections, at the heart of which was the collection of Umar Falke, Alhaj Umar Falke, who died in 1962, a scholar and a merchant who used to live in Kano. And when he died, his library was divided among his heirs. Later, a scholar from Northwestern who was doing his PhD at the time in Kano, by name John Pardon, recognized the importance of Islamic intellectual tradition, and he purchased much of the manuscript that had been distributed among the heirs and reassembled the library and took it to Northwestern. At there, the manuscript number over 3,000 items, including an autobiography written by Alhaji Umar Falke himself, which I had analyzed in one of my publications. This formed the heart of the Arabic manuscript collection in Northwestern, some items of over 300,000. A PhD was done on the work by late Muhammad Abdullahi in 1978. Another PhD was done by a Ghanaian scholar in the 1980s. A senior colleague of mine, Dr. Hamid Boboi, did his PhD on that collection, and I myself did my PhD utilizing some of that connection. So that connection has generated intellectual engagement with the content of it. And that intellectual engagement at Northwestern University has continued, especially through the works of the famous Orientalist John Hanwick, who devoted his entire career in the study of the Islamic intellectual traditions of Africa and to some extent also North Africa. He was a frequent visitor to Morocco, and he had several colleagues there. His career was finally completed at Northwestern University. He died not long ago. And he was the author of a big collection of biographical entries of West African scholars with their title of their manuscripts and detail about each manuscript, where copies are to be found, and whether the manuscript has been translated or has been studied in a PhD, or it has been commented upon, or is a poem that has received a takhmis, whatever happened to it. He wrote the work on the model of Mu'jam al-Mu'allifin, and he was also influenced by the Orientalist tradition of Karl Brockelmann. So if you read an entry, if you take an author like Sultan Muhammad Bello, you will see a lot of information about them. That was one of the important intellectual engagement at Northwestern University. An institute was established there. It is called an Institute for the Study of Islamic Thought in Africa, which is largely dedicated with the continuing engagement with the Arabic manuscript collection at Northwestern. Many more PhDs have been trained. Several conferences have been organized, and the proceedings have been published. And constantly, I asked if I could show the website, but they told me that there could be no connection because of network connectivity. But if you visit the website at African Manuscript at Northwestern, you can see the series of intellectual and scholarly activities that are connected to the manuscript collection. And I think towards the conclusion of my point, my presentation, I would like to emphasize this point, that the manuscripts are fascinating as historical artifacts. Some of the elegant artistic design of them is fascinating. And looking at a 100-year-old manuscript has its own fascination. However, if that's all we see in the manuscript, we are not really doing justice to it. We should see it as a store of knowledge that we should engage with. And that engagement is not a one-time affair. We should generate active active, intellectual, ongoing conversation, discussion, and debate about the manuscripts that we have. And in this regard, I'm very grateful to have been invited to this event because it appears to me, although I do not know a lot about the Muassasa Muhammad VI, I don't know much about it. This is the first time I learn about it. It appears to me it is the kind of engagement with the trust, not just al-hifaz alayhi, not just the preservation, but active intellectual engagement, study, translation, commentary, use as sources, and so on and so forth.
شكرا.
Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum.
تابعونا على موقع مؤسسة محمد السادس للعلماء الأفارقة وعلى شبكاتها الاجتماعية.